Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. I am Susan Barber from the ATL. I've had one too many cups of coffee today and finished watching Tiger King. Mr. Escobar, have you seen Tiger King?
As soon as you said that, I I thought, oh, some
Here
someone's been
we
watching.
here we go. And let me say, like students, I know like y'all are trying to figure out like how to manage your time and it's just weird, but like for teachers, like this is our first pandemic we're going through too. So we're figuring out a lot of this and we're talking among ourselves. A lot of teachers are talking about things we're watching on Netflix, things we're reading, how we're spending our time. But Miss Stacy Dawson from San Jose, she's like, we've got to open the AP Lit Review with "Hey, all you cool cats and kittens." So, yeah, crazy times, right? So I'm Susan Barber, Grady High School GKGK, proud to be representing them and ready for another day of AP Lit Review. We're talking about one of my favorite things today, how to organize essays. I also want to say hi to one of my friends' classes, Miss Cindy Dixon from Savannah, Georgia, right down the road at Richmond Hill High School. Go Wildcats. So hello to everybody. How are things in Miami today?
Things are well. We were supposed to get a lot of rain and we didn't, so we'll probably get a lot of heat instead.
Huh.
We were already at 97 a couple days back, so Miami is feeling the heat, and that is not the Miami Heat, the team, but the actual temperature. I want
Hey,
to say
wait,
hello.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
look who's with me today. Bear. I'm sorry he did not say hi, but he is with us. He's ready for another lesson.
Wearing a cap?
He's wearing this is like the state flag of Alabama. So
That
he's
is
repping Alabama
awesome. There
today.
you go. Great. So speaking of states, it's been duly noted that Arizona is watching. I received an email that my map did not have any pins on Arizona, and there's nothing to apologize for. I just hadn't received an email from anyone in Arizona, and I also haven't had time to update the map. So I apologize. These videos take a minute to plan. Ms. Barber and I spend a lot of time on the phone and texting, planning these things, and then we have our own classes. But I promise the map is forthcoming. So I would like to say hello to Miss Stafford, Mrs. Stafford out there, and I want to give a shout out to Mrs. Perkins in Woodstock Union High School, who I've been told is number one, the sweetest woman ever, and
Hmm.
number two, so this is a little experiment. I was told that she would go nuts if we say hello. So, if we could drive someone crazy and we can feel like, I don't know, the Beatles for a second, then that'd be great.
We drive our
Um,
students crazy, right? That
that's
maybe
right.
in a
That's
different
right.
way though.
And before we get into today's lesson, which is an incredibly important lesson, I want to talk about um, thesis in reference to an email I received. Someone asked, are students no longer required to speak about the theme outside of the book? Go to, the human experience, go to society. And this is going to be a perhaps a longer discussion than what we have time for here. But, according to the rubric, and I'm going back to the 9 point rubric, that was never delineated. Now, the upper half papers, these are students who technically can take the passage and put it in the context of humanity and the world as a whole. But that was never, especially with a holistic scoring, right? It was never like, okay, you get 1 point for that. So it was never a requirement per se. And if you look at the rubric now, there is a bullet point with the sophistication talking about students' ability to put this outside of the context of the story. And so students will definitely be rewarded or encouraged if they can do this in a real organic way. It's not about inserting one statement, let's say within the thesis as a dependent clause, or I've heard some teachers sometimes say, make sure you end your essay with some human experience sentence. That won't get you the point. If if a student truly sees this passage as reflective of society, then that should be embedded within the argument throughout the essay. That
Mhm.
should, that should be part of the thesis. That should be part of the claim in at least one of the body paragraphs. It should definitely drive the conclusion because there's this discovery that it's not about these characters and it's not about this setting, but that the characters and the setting are reflecting something back to humanity. So it's a little more nuanced, I think. If you've been teaching your students to do that and your students now have an eye for that, again, I think because of that third row, if they can sell it in a sophisticated way and not a canned way, then they might benefit from it. So they're not being discouraged from doing that. As a matter of fact, I think it's more explicitly encouraged now than it was in the holistic 9 point rubric. Miss Barber, we see eye to eye on this, I think.
We see eye to eye on that. So, and a little teacher talk up front, but yeah, we just write, stay embedded in the text, write on the text is what we encourage our students to do.
Yeah. Okay, so last night they were supposed to write the thesis statement, right, for the Zenobia prompt, and we have a few here, and we want to talk about whether or not these would earn the point. Let's look at the first one. Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia through the setting of Zenobia's house, the dialogue between the narrator and Zenobia, and the contrast of their friend Hollingsworth. This is an interesting one, written by someone playing student
Yours
here.
truly. Uh-huh.
Um, and what's interesting is you really want to give this thesis the point. It sounds smart. There seems to be a lot of buildup for evidence. I can see where the essay is going to go. So maybe there's a line of reasoning being developed already within it, but there's just no answer, right? What
Mhm.
is the attitude towards
Mhm.
Zenobia? Where are the adjectives? Where is the answer? So this one is a little deceiving because it wouldn't. If I were to ask Miss Barber, go ahead and highlight where the answer lies, she wouldn't be able to do it here. Um, you were going to say something?
No, I think that's right. I'm not at all answering the prompt. Why is the narrator's attitude complex? Doesn't get to that.
So let's look at one of your students, perhaps, right?
Yes.
Hawthorne, through the use of personification of Zenobia's individual features and the dramatic irony from the dialogue, portrays the jealous and
Mhm.
scornful attitude. I don't have to read any further.
Right.
There's
We've
an answer right
identified it.
there. We've identified it. I know exactly what will be argued in this essay. I tell my students all the time that a thesis statement is a promise, and it's not just about writing the thesis statement, but it's about following through with that promise. So I hope this Grady student who has promised us a really great essay then follows through and really develops the ideas of jealousy and the scornful attitude, because that, they'd be hitting a home run at that point. The next one comes from Vermont. This was one of the email contributions, I believe.
From Miss Perkins' class.
In this passage, the author describes a moment in which a proud, mysterious woman is revealed truthfully and humbly for the first time. The author employs a specific narrator perspective, symbolism, and dialogue in order to convey the narrator's admiration. Boom, the answer is right there,
Mhm.
of Zenobia, but also his skepticism. Now,
Right.
there's complexity now, right?
Love it.
It's this, but it's also this. So I know that this student, again, a thesis is a promise. If they follow through on this promise, we're in for a great essay. Sophie, congratulations out there in Vermont. And the last one, at first glance, the narrator perceives Zenobia as haughty and condescending. Boom, right off the bat, I have an answer. An observation only bolstered by the imagery of her exuberant surroundings. I love the fact that the adjectives are not just for the attitude, but now
Mhm.
the setting here, right? The exuberant surroundings, but a glaring contrast between what Zenobia says and her actions sway the narrator to believe that she is more sympathetic than initially believed. So there's room for a lot of interpretation, a lot of essay can come out of this. And I'm thinking the student in 40 minutes will be hard pressed to do all of this, which is great, right? Like promise a
Exactly.
lot and then do as much as you can, and you'll be rewarded for every bit that you're able to follow through with. This is great. So Ms. Barber, you were shown how to do this, huh, by these students. This is great.
Exactly. I love being shown up.
That's right. All right. So today we are moving beyond the thesis. We already established the thesis. We know what that should sound like. We know what it should do. And now we're going to develop the commentary that establishes and explains the relationships among textual evidence, the line of reasoning, and the thesis. If you've been following these videos, you see that we started a few videos back, I think 3 videos back, with when I'm reading, how do I pull evidence? What kind of notes do I take? How do I determine which quotations are important? How do I jot that down on a sheet of paper in preparation for the essay? Then we really looked at the prompt to try to make sense of what it is that we're being asked. And then we answered the thesis, right? So now we have a thesis. We know that we've collected some evidence, but how do we put it all together? And what do we do with this notion of establishing a line of reasoning, which you've heard us talk about so many times? And it really is, as I've mentioned before, a new catchphrase within the AP Lit community. This comes out of the course and exam description, but it's one that we have to address. And it's one, like I've said before, that we've addressed in the past. We just didn't call it this. So today we're going to see how we organize our essay, where we put commentary, what we comment on in order to establish some sort of line of reasoning in our
Yes.
essay.
So today we want to talk to you this is a very practical lesson on how do you organize an essay. And there are probably more than 3 ways to organize essays, but when I think about organizing an essay, these 3 come to mind. I can organize an essay by insight or ideas that I have, insights that I have about the passage as I read. I can organize the essay just the order of the text itself, just working my way systematically through the passage. And we've talked about chunking the passage into different to smaller parts to deal with. So I could just systematically work my way through the passage. Or, and this is what we typically see a lot of students doing, especially when they come to the course at the beginning, organizing by device, meaning like I'll write a paragraph about point of view, and then my next paragraph is going to be about personification, and my last paragraph is going to be about imagery. So they'll organize, they'll build each paragraph around device. Those are 3 different ways, and there are probably more, but 3 really common ways to organize essays. So we want to look at each way and then talk through how to organize your essay. So I really love essays that are organized by insight. And this is where paragraphs are centered on observations that you have when you're reading the text. So you're bringing your original insight, your original ideas when you're reading the text. You are writing topic sentences on based on these ideas that you have, and you organize your essay that way. Now, I think the advantage of this is when you think about our note taking, we had a what do you notice? How do you see it? That's all your devices. Why is it important? The when you are writing about the things that you notice, it's easier for you to write about because those are the things that jump off the page for you. So I think it's easier to take the things you notice and then tie that back to answering the prompt. It's also easier for someone to give analysis on the things that the parts of the text that they understand. When you organize by insight, it's easy I think it's easier to establish a line of reasoning than if you're organizing by device. So all of these are advantages, and we're going to look at an example. So you're going to see how this plays out. All of these are advantages of why it's good, why I think organizing by insight sets you up to a really solid essay. Now, so the second way we talked, and I really want to see us marry these two, and that's what I'm going to show an example of, is chunking the passage and working our way through the passage. So this is where paragraphs are centered on different chunks, different smaller parts of the passage that we've divided out, whether that be by a shift in the character that we see, or a shift in tone, or maybe the narrative pace changes. Maybe you're going from all description to dialogue. Somehow you're dividing this passage into smaller chunks. And then we can think about each chunk and just systematically work our way through the passage. I really like this because we're dealing with the passage as a whole. We're not skipping large parts of the passage, and we're not picking and choosing and maybe going out of order. So it lets us think logically through what's happening from beginning to end. And I think this is a really easy way to establish progression of character development, or progression throughout the story, looking at shifts in tone possibly, or shifts in point of view. Going in order like this really sets you up nicely for that. Now, what you have to be careful of if you're doing it this way is that you just don't give paragraphs with plot summary. Well, this is what happens in the first part of the passage. This is what happens in the second part. So that's something that you really want to be cautious of. And that's why I really like for you to I encourage my students to organize their essays by insight, but go in the order of the passage. So let's look at an
I do
example.
the same
Go ahead.
thing, and I want to say one more thing that I've noticed about this this approach. I think another con, definitely the biggest caveat should be the plot summary. We see that all
Mhm.
the time, right? But the second thing is, and I think you've mentioned this a few times, which is just such a good piece of advice, and I want students to remember it. Always consider the beginning and the end,
Mhm.
right? The test development committee has chosen to give you this this glimpse into a passage. Why did they choose to start here? Why did they choose to end here? And I think the other caution for this one is time management. If you don't get to the end of the passage and really do a great interpretation of what's going on there, you might miss the development of the character at that point. You might miss the turn. You might miss something really, really significant. And that's why I also encourage my students to do the first thing, the insight approach,
Mhm.
in a chronological way.
Mhm.
But when you're dealing with insight, you're already taking the totality. And really,
Mhm.
at that point, when you follow the chronology, you're really following it for evidence, right? Um, but the insight is already an interpretation of the work as a whole, which is so important if you're going to run out of time, which could happen to any of us, really.
Right. So the insight, that's what assures that you're answering the prompt. And then the order of the passage is just making sure that you are not missing any gaps or any major shifts. I just think it's the
Absolutely.
way
Yeah.
to approach an essay. So let's look at an example. This is one of my students. She turned this in last week, Nadia. So shout out to her. She knows I am using this today. And what I've done for you is I'm going to give you each of her topic sentences for the body paragraph and then the chunk that it goes with. So her thesis statement, and I had not, I still gave the prompt last week that had the author's name in it, but easy to take that out. In this excerpt from Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author shows already, boom, here we go. Complex, attitude. Shows the internal struggle of the narrator as she tries to reconcile the Zenobia she is currently interacting with her memories of the old one. That's really all I need to read, answered the prompt. She goes on, the struggle results in an inner discord, and Hawthorne ultimately portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia as one full of weariness and contempt, condemning the woman's selfishness. So this is her thesis. This is her promise as to what we can find in the rest of her essay. Body paragraph 1. She's going to start at the beginning of the passage, and she's going to give us an insight about the first chunk of the beginning. And I apologize because I cut like all of the line numbers, but this is like the first 30 lines of the Zenobia passage. That's her first chunk, and her topic sentence is, the excerpt opens with the narrator regarding the evidence of Zenobia's love of opulence and self-indulgence in, here's the insight, what at first seems to be awe and appreciation, but later turns into disgust and disapproval. So that's the insight about the first chunk of this text. And then in this body paragraph, she can go on and unpack the devices, imagery, symbolism. How is the author communicating this insight? And then explain that, give the analysis of that. So that's chunk number 1 in the insight. Body paragraph number 2 is going to be about like the next 15 lines. As the narrator speaks with and observes Zenobia, she struggles with the belief that Zenobia is falsely representing herself. So again, this ties back to the thesis, this inner struggle, the inner discord. All of her topic sentences connect back to the thesis, but this is specific insight on this chunk number 2, the second part of the passage. She struggles with the belief that Zenobia is falsely representing herself, calling her an illusion, believing Zenobia wants to feel ashamed and small, fighting against the effects which Zenobia sought to impose upon her. So this paragraph, she can unpack like this quick dialogue that we have between the two of them. The pacing picks up a little bit here. And so she can flesh that out and explain that. Body paragraph number 3. This is the next chunk. And this is like a large part of the passage. Zenobia's reply, however, is not what the narrator had been hoping for, and solidifies her belief that the woman is selfish and untrustworthy, leaving the narrator with a contemptuous attitude toward her. Again, connecting back to that thesis, back to part of the internal struggle, the insight of showing what the narrator has learned. And so much in this part, the harsh and direct diction, she can use that as evidence when explaining and unpacking this, really the self-reflection of the narrator here. There's lots of varying punctuation in this chunk of the passage as the narrator is thinking through her thoughts and wrestling with all of that. So all of that can be used as evidence to unpack the insight here in the topic sentence. And then finally, body paragraph 4, the narrator longs for Zenobia to remain as she always has. And when it is revealed that Zenobia has changed, the narrator discards any positive feelings for her. So again, this topic sentence, it definitely ties back to the internal struggle. In this very last paragraph in the excerpt that we're given, can talk about like figurative language, similes, personification, unpack those to help flesh out her insight. So this is a great example of how a writer has chunked the text. They're working systematically through the passage, but each chunk has a topic sentence built around an insight that specifically relates to that part of the passage. Now, this writer has 4. You may look at this passage and say, I can only divide it 3 ways. I've seen passages divided 2 ways, and you have like a shift in the middle, and there's one lengthy body paragraph that talks about what happens before a shift in a character, and a lengthy body paragraph that what happens after. So we're not going after a set number of body paragraphs, but just how are you going to chunk this passage? What insights do you have around each of those chunks? And then those become your body paragraphs.
Yeah, and
Does
I
that make
wouldn't.
sense, Mr.
Absolutely,
Escobar?
yeah. And yeah, I have a lot of students sometimes who ask me questions, and I know where they're coming from, right? I know that they've been told certain things. Um, the students who ask me how many paragraphs should an
Huh.
essay be, or how many sentences should a paragraph have, or things like. And truthfully, there's no right answer, right? I don't. I tell them your thesis will dictate how many paragraphs you should have, and really how fast you can work during that
Mhm.
40-minute constraint. When you go to college in a few months, guys, and you're writing 10-page papers, 15-page papers, 20-page papers, 50-page papers, if you're working towards your master's or something,
Mhm.
you can't write a 5-paragraph essay at that point, right? Each of your paragraphs will be 10 pages long. So you need to develop a strong thesis that's going to dictate how many topic sentences you really can extrapolate and work towards, and then just hope that within those 45 minutes this year, that within those 45 minutes you get as much done as you possibly could. But there aren't these strict rules, there are guidances that your teachers may give you. But truthfully, at the reading, I don't know, Ms. Barber, I've never counted how many paragraphs an essay has or how many sentences
Nope.
a paragraph has. That it's just you're reading it, you're trying to give credit where credit is due, and we move forward. And this is
So
the last way, right?
this is what we want to advise against. And I will tell you why. A lot of students will organize paragraphs around devices. And so an example of that would be like, the author uses similes to show the narrator's complex attitude towards Zenobia. And even if you put a qualifier, the narrator's disgusted view of Zenobia. Even if you do that and bring in a little insight, I think the problem with organizing by device is it's much harder to establish a line of reasoning when we do this. And it also, it, it really constricts you. It really restrains you in your analysis. It does not let you fully flesh out ideas because it's so centered on the one specific thing. So we do want you to write about devices, but use that within organizing by insight, working your way through the passage.
That's right. I mean, this is so important. And if your teacher has taught you to write an essay organized by devices, then I think you do that this year. We started in one of the videos by saying your teacher is right, your teacher is the
Right.
master, and
Your
we're just
teacher
giving
trumps
you
us.
other advice, right? However, if your teachers have told you to try to avoid organizing by devices, then I really want to encourage that. And the way I think about it is like this. If I open a paragraph and I say
And I
the
think there are some examples on the next slide.
There will be, yeah. I'm always afraid of what follows is just going to be
Mhm.
evidence of imagery or
Right,
diction, but then where's the commentary? And the fix sometimes is just as simple as switch your sentence around.
right.
If you're saying that the similes are conveying her disgruntled attitude, then open with disgruntled attitude, and then in that paragraph, you won't just talk about imagery. You might talk about dialogue and character relationships, all sorts of things at that point.
Exactly. So just like Mr. Escobar was saying, if you look at topic sentence from body paragraph number 1, the imagery in this scene is one of the biggest contributors to conveying the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. It's not that you should not talk about imagery. However, use that in support of a topic sentence that has insight to it. So that's exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, what Mr. Escobar said. So I have all of the slides today. I've taken all of this information, and that should be in the description under today's videos, so you can look more closely at all of that with the examples. So when we're thinking about practice, or check for understanding, this fits perfectly with the way we talked about organizing your thoughts and jotting down notes when you're reading a passage, thinking about the beginning of the text, the middle of the text, the end of the text. What do you notice? What stands out at you? How is the author communicating that? That's where all of the devices come in. And then why is this important? And that's your analysis. We're going to be talking about analysis later in the week, Friday. Yeah, we're cruising through this week. Summary versus analysis, we'll talk about Friday. So organizing your essays by insight, by working your way through the passage, aligns perfectly with taking notes this way. You're totally set up to write.
So when we're talking about, and it shouldn't say perspective up there, it
Oh
should say,
gosh, we
uh,
miss that every time.
yeah, we, just we're learning to live with that. Um, but when we're talking about the development of commentary, and we're looking really at how we pace our essay, what do we put where, right? What are we going to open with? What is our line of reasoning? And today we spoke to you about three different ways of organizing it. One is through your insight, which is our preferred method. Another one is through chronology, which we actually like a lot, especially if you're able to blend it with the insight. And
Exactly.
then the third way, which is not a wrong way, but we see more pitfalls there, maybe, which is organizing by devices. The questions here, some of the key questions you will ask yourselves, what are the logical reasons, inferences, and or conclusions that justify your claim? Based on those logical reasons, you're going to build your paragraph. So your thesis was a promise of something you're going to prove. Now you have to prove it. It's not about free writing. It's not about stream of consciousness. It's about developing an argument. So there should be a uh, an apparent, a transparent line of reasoning threaded throughout your essay. Look at that last bullet point as well. How do you develop commentary that conveys your complex argument about an interpretation of literature? Because your points have been organized in a deliberate manner, your commentary should grow as your essay develops. So you should be able to say, we've already looked at this, but now this new evidence takes us to this other place. And that's really where you're going to start developing, I think, a more complex understanding of the shifts that will happen within a text. So the way you organize is critical to honestly trying to earn higher points in the
Mhm.
second row and trying to earn that sophistication point as well.
Yeah, what we really want you to do is take time thinking about how you're going to organize your essay before you start writing. You've got to give yourself some time to do that planning, because in the long run, that is going to pay off. And I know it is so tempting to just jump in and start writing
Mhm.
because the clock is ticking, but really, 2 or 3 minutes planning really sets you up to write well. So tonight we're going to look at the same prompt. We're spending a lot of time on this. Same prompt. Here's the stable wording, and here's the text, and we'd just like for you to think about organizing your essay. So using your thesis statement, and maybe after even looking at some thesis statements today and thinking a little more about it, you want to revise your thesis statement, totally fine. Revision, I think that's where a lot of the good thinking and good learning occurs, when we go back and revise things that we've already written. So get your thesis statement just like you want it, and then I want you to think through, how would you organize your paper, and go ahead and write topic sentences for each of your body paragraph, and then
For that
think.
first question, we're really asking them, perhaps, unless they can think of another one, for which of the three methods, right?
Yeah,
I think that would probably
I think
focus, I
yes.
think, our task a little better.
Exactly. And then think about, do these topic sentences show a progression of order? Can you see an established line of reasoning through that? So that's what we want you to think on tonight. We'll jump back in and start with that tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about embedding quotes and how do we pull in evidence with our own ideas, and just how does all of that look? How can we do that seamlessly? If you do not have a device, the deadline is coming up. I think it's this Friday to let College Board know. So teachers, get word out if you know of students who don't have access, because they are trying to make sure everyone has what they need. I think that's it from here. Bear's still with us. He shook the hat off. He had enough of that. So signing out from Atlanta today, always love spending time with you. Seniors, class of 2020, love you. Proud of the work y'all are doing.
Absolutely. Goodbye, everyone.